if you shorten your draw length, it tends to make the float maybe a little tighter but quicker, and then if you make a mistake, it's typically a bigger mistake than if your draw length's a little longer.
Thinner arrows shoot better downrange in variable conditions for certain.
I've probably seen more pictures of dead 200-inch deer in the last 3 months than I've probably seen ever in my entire life.
Hey everyone, this is Rod White, and you're either listening to or watching the Rod White Bow Show. Today's guest is Dan Jasa, who has just made a big move to the state of Ohio from Missouri, which I would say is a huge upgrade in whitetail possibilities, to pursue his newly found career in the archery industry after a career as a personal fitness trainer, and has been shooting roughly for about 7 years competitively, I believe. His accomplishments include a top 5 finish in the Open Pro division at Lancaster, very prestigious shoot for those of you that haven't heard of it. 2 perfect scores at the U.S. Indoor Team Trials, 300s. I believe those are 300s with 300 baby X's at 20 yards, correct?
Yes, that's right.
That's pretty awesome, about the size of a dime at 20 yards. So when we get to talking about that, remember this guy because not a whole lot of people have done that. He's tied first in the ASA Metropolis K50 division, shooting a near perfect 550, or I think 560 is a perfect. So is that right? Field round?
Yep.
He shot a 550.
Field round 560.
Yep.
Perfect.
And by the way, a field round is, we're going to talk quite a bit about that, and hopefully folks who are getting involved in it. One thing I think I should mention, I believe, and I could be wrong on the number, but there's only like 4 or 5 people who have ever shot perfect rounds. Do you know, Dan?
I don't. I mean, I know Jesse's cleaned it multiple times, and I don't think anyone's claimed it the last couple years.
But like historically,
at Nationals anyways.
I think like Mike Leiter, maybe.
Mike Leiter shot one, or shot a few, I think. I know Scott Starnes has shot 1 or 2. It's a
very elite crowd.
You got to have a little bit of luck to be able to clean one of those rounds, I think.
Tore it up.
Yeah, it was the only one I missed was an 80, and it was about a 1/4 inch tall.
That's awesome, dude. So he's got some very impressive field shooting accomplishments, and he's also won 5 consecutive Midwest Field Section Championships. So he's knows his stuff when it comes to competitive archery. Not to mention, he's consistently posting some incredible indoor scores, it seems like, at all the indoor tournaments, residing as a common itch on a lot of our backs as professional shooters who shoot indoors, especially at NFA indoor rounds, it seems. Dude, you wear me out sometimes. Always like, how'd Dan shoot? It's always a good answer. And so today's topic is all about his journey to an industry job that most people really only dream of, and I get constantly asked about, which is funny because maybe I would take one of those right now if I could find one. With PSE.
They're very hard to find.
They are, and when the openings come up, there's a long list of people waiting to get in. But we're going to talk a little bit about that, and he is with PSE Archery, and he's also going to talk about those field archery shooting setups. We're going to talk about the 2017 PSE lineup just a bit and his choice of equipment for what he's going to be doing throughout most of the rest of the year. So welcome to the show, Dan.
Thanks, Rod.
How did you get started in archery? Like, what was the spark? And just describe, like, if you can, like, how did you get to where you are now? Because where you are is a very coveted place for a lot of people to get to.
Oh, I got I think the first time I really ever was introduced into archery was just there's a sporting goods store around where I grew up, and just a bow hanging on the wall just kind of intrigued me, and I asked for it for Christmas, and my parents got it for me when I think I was 11 or 12 years old. They got me a Jennings Lightning. I still have it to this day. I used it just to target shoot around the house a lot. I never hunted big game with it or anything, and then I did a lot of bow fishing with it too. So that's kind of what got me into archery to begin with. So,
well, bow fishing, like back in the day, like there wasn't a whole lot of people doing that. Like my idea of bow fishing was I grew up shooting in Pennsylvania, in western Pennsylvania, and working at a place called Golden Grain Archery. And I remember getting arrows from like the lost and found, from where people had like missed targets, because I would set up the courses and pull them back down. and those were
Hmm.
my bow fishing arrows. And I never knew until like several years later, like until I was in, I think when I went to work for Matthews in Wisconsin, that's when I found out like you actually people tie strings to the back end of those arrows to reel a fish back in. Just remember shooting barrelfuls of those things and just waylaying carp left and right. But
Yep.
that's pretty cool. I didn't know you did that. So was that off of a boat, or was that you just cruised around
No,
creeks?
we did everything off the bank. Had a good friend that grew up near me that his family had a cabin on a lake, and we'd go over there on the weekends and fish and shoot fish and basically get into a bunch of trouble we probably shouldn't have been getting into.
We all have horrible pasts. We don't want to talk about, but they were fun pasts. Um, so then you got into tournament archery somehow.
Yeah, that was. I grew up in Nebraska, and then I moved to Missouri, and for the my personal trainer job, and just happened to meet some of the right people to kind of get me back into the outdoors. And one of the guys, Jim Blair, who's actually the commissioner of the Missouri Department of Conservation now. At the time, he was just involved in the outdoors just because it was his passion, and he had grown up in the outdoors, and he had a bow he was selling to get a new one, and asked me if I wanted it. So obviously I said yes, and then him and I started hunting together, and that's kind of what got me into doing more of the big game stuff. And then after hunting season was over, I still had the itch to shoot, so started finding new ways to go out and be able to shoot, and found this weird thing called 3D shoots I never even knew existed, and started shooting those, and then slowly started finding other forms of archery.
Well, there's definitely a gap that's still missing. I mean, back when I started the archery in the schools program, there was a struggle for us to talk about. I mean, over and over and over again. I mean, even bringing together the organizations like Bruce called the NFAA, and we used the at the time National Archery Association's lessons courses to certified teachers, or actually certified fish and wildlife officers, then certified teachers, and got those kids involved in archery. And that link is still missing on how to get those kids. They get to shoot the bows, but I relate it like this, and I know a lot of people can criticize me for saying this, but it's the absolute truth. There's still that link missing, and there is an organization called S3DA, but the, in most states they still lack the bridge to get from, okay, I shot archery, it was really cool, but honestly, it's not much different than like playing powder puff or indoor volleyball or kickball. Like, how do you get from there to getting a bow in your hand that's fitted to you, and then exploring the options that are out there? So I know a lot of us are still working on that, but obviously you found a way to get there regardless.
And I completely agree with you with the fact that there's a link missing between the NASP program and just what else there is for kids to do in archery outside of NASP. And we've struggled with that. When I was back in Missouri, I was on the board of representatives for the state NFAA organization, and we were trying to figure out a way to have the NFAA state indoor championships and the NASP state indoor championships held at the same place, so we could kind of figure out a way to bridge that gap. But it just seems like there's a lot of hoops to jump through, and a lot of people that kind of, we've always done it this way, we don't want to change kind of mentality to get people where we can introduce kids to it, because I know there's a lot of kids that have no idea that there is something else out there besides a Genesis bow and aluminum. What are they?
Eight,
1913 aluminum
1818
arrows,
actually, I believe.
1818s.
Yeah, or 1820s.
So I completely agree with you in the fact that there needs to be a way to bridge that gap a little bit. I think S3DA is a step in the right direction.
Well,
Anyway,
there's definitely, and the step that you found was, it sounds like you had some people that you were hunting with, or someone you were hunting with, and they, I don't know, at least led you on the right path to finding those 3 tournaments. And so
yep.
This is not a topic we were planning on talking about at all, but I would, how would I say that? I would reach out to, I am reaching out to everybody who's listening. If everybody who's listening right now, and granted, I haven't even turned these on yet, but obviously there'll be like 10 podcasts that all hit at the same time, and it'll be live. So who knows how many people will listen? But as the show grows, the people that are listening, and I'll be constantly reminding them, if let's just say there were 1,000 people, And those 1,000 people just took the time, wherever it is that they're shooting at, in their backyard, if they're hunting or if they're at a club somewhere, just to reach out to their kids who are shooting and their friends and just let them shoot a few arrows and explain to them or give them the opportunities to shoot with you for a day. That would triple it instantly.
Yep.
And so some of those responsibility they just can't all fall on somebody sitting somewhere in a job. It can't fall on S3DA. It can't fall on organizations. It kind of falls on our shoulders as bow hunters. If you want to procure your right to hunt and continue to grow sports where there's more people competing, I just challenge everybody out there just to take a little bit of time, grab a kid by the hand and grab an adult. I see a lot of single women out there who are divorced and single guys that have kids that they get very limited time with them. Like for me, for example, I only have time with my kids every other weekend if I don't have a shoot, and it's a struggle to get those weekends switched, unfortunately for me. But when I do, a lot of our time is spent shooting bows, and I think that little bit of step that everybody can take towards that direction would help grow that quite a bit and make more openings for people to pursue their dream like you are right now, and as an industry professional.
Yep. I agree with you.
So let's talk a little bit about field archery, because if you want to talk about a dying sport, it seems like, and everything seems to run in cycles in archery. I giggle a lot of times when I hear all the podcasts about and all the, oh boy, all the new things on archery talk about people. Hey, I just found out this new way of shooting a release or this new way of doing this or that. It's all cyclical. It's all been done before.
It's not new. It's recycled.
Right. That doesn't mean there's not technological advances in some products, but certainly a stick and a string is still a stick and a string. And field archery is, I think I'm sure it was one of the births of 3D archery for sure. I don't know what else you would attribute it to. Reading coming up, I think, was probably very popular before 3D archery even began. And some of those are 3D targets. Some of them are actually 2D targets, I guess you'd call them, like 2.5D. I don't know how you say that. They're not full blown 3D targets, but they're cool animals that you shoot at, and they have red dots on them. Tell you the distance to the target. You can use a rangefinder and use cut charts, which we talked a lot about with Jimmy, so we'll skip all that. But for you, shooting field archery and having kind of become a whiz at that, what are some of the most common things that you can think of that would help someone who's just entering field archery? What are the things they need to look for in their setups? What kind of a setup would they have? I mean, a lot of these people are just bow hunters. Some may be indoor shooters that are just getting ready to go outside, even though it's turkey season. A lot of turkey hunters out there. How do you find ranges? What kind of setups do you have? What kind of arrows are you shooting? Just
I say that the biggest part is finding a range. I was pretty spoiled in St. Louis. Now living in Columbus, the closest field range to me is an hour away now. Where in St. Louis there was two of them inside the city limits. So um, that's probably the biggest hurdle, and probably why field archery is kind of seems like it's going downhill. Is just the lack of ranges. I know there's a lot of things that could be done. I think the biggest thing is it probably has to have some kind of um, city involvement to build ranges. I know ATA's worked on trying to get funds to help people build ranges and get more people exposed to it. So um, just being able to find a range can be a challenge sometimes.
well, I'll certainly post some resources. Obviously, links back to the NFAA and whatever other resources I can dig up in the show notes, so you can look at those below and find links to those, and hopefully that'll help you in your area. I know there's a website, I think it's called 3dshoots.com, is that right?
Yep.
And I think they even have a separate division on there, but the thing is, here's what's happening with field archery from what I can see, and even somewhat locally here, is the club members who are involved in it, there was, well, I can give you an example. Waltonian Archers is a great club, great resource that's up north of me about an hour and a half, and that's probably my closest field archery range to me, I'm guessing, or that I know of. And they used to have, not too long ago, I want to say like people were telling me 15, 20 years ago, they used to have like 1,800 people come to a tournament there. That's a ridiculous number of shooters. Now you go there this weekend, and I'll be lucky. You would be very lucky if you found 3 people shooting this weekend. It's a beautiful weekend out. Of course, it's Easter weekend, bad example, but you just
On a typical weekend,
yeah.
you don't see very many people at the field range.
Right, and even within the clubs, which is shocking to me, like there's no place to shoot. I've contemplated a lot building a facility in Iowa City because I'd like to get up near my kids. I'm just not the kind of person that should be sitting in a shop all day. It would go bad for everyone involved. But there's no place to shoot indoors even really up there. I mean, there's a couple little lanes at I think it's Fin and Feather has a couple lanes, but that's about it. There's just not much, and so as those people who have run those ranges have gotten older, it's just not really on their priority list, and respectfully so. It's just not on their priority list to go out there and try to find new members and maintain the targets and continue to do the work that's necessary to keep those ranges alive. I don't even I'm sure they have field shoots, but and I haven't been to one, but I'm just gonna bet you there's less than 20 people probably that show up. Maybe I'm understating that, but
Yep.
that's something that if you're wanting to help out with something, if you have a local club that has one of those and you're interested in it, boy, I bet most clubs would jump all over the opportunity to have somebody help them just swap out bale targets for them, whatever those may be. Well, a lot of them are still hay bales, or help fix up the range, do a little work around there, and get those back into shape, and then you can start holding some shoots again. But I know there's definitely there's quite a few. If you get up in northeast Iowa, there's like the Butte Field Archers, and there's signs I see here and there while I'm traveling all over the place. It seems to be more so in the Midwest and upper Midwest, out east towards Pennsylvania, where you see a lot of those, and I'm sure there's several out west. But when I'm out west, I usually have an elk tag and I have tunnel vision on what I'm going. So those are opportunities for people out there. But the setups, let's talk about those real quick. How do you set what? Well, first of all, I mean, obviously you're shooting for PSE. What setup are you using right now? Like your whole gear run. Just give us a quick rundown of your gear list.
Right now, I have a Evolve 35 set up. I'm shooting X10 Pro Tours. I'm shooting the new 340s with 140 grain points in them. AAE fletches, AAE Freak Show arrow rest, AAE stabilizers. I'm shooting a Shrewd scope with a 19 thousandths 45-degree pin in it.
Whoa, what's the 45-degree pin? A lot of people don't know.
So instead of having a pin that comes either straight out from the side or straight up and down, it comes off at a 45-degree angle. I seem to like that a little bit better than either straight up or from out to the side.
Okay.
That's one of the nice things with the Shrewd housings is you can take your pin out and there's 8 different positions you can put your pin in.
Oh, cool.
So if you like something weird like a 45-degree pin, they've got options for that too, which is kind of nice.
That's cool. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. But
no, that's all
go
right.
ahead.
And then I'm shooting a Stanislavski shoot off release. I think that's it. Yeah.
So
feather vision lens. I'm shooting a 6-power feather vision lens with a my peep. I think I've got a 3/32 aperture in it.
okay. You have a clarifier in there or no?
Nope, just a straight aperture. I like to keep as much glass out of my peep as I can, just because if you get rain or get something where your lens fogs up or something like that, it's hard to clean those out.
You were at OPA last year, weren't you?
Yes.
Great example.
Yeah. So it's a little easier to clean off a lens that's on a scope as opposed to a lens that's a 3/32 size hole in it.
Yep.
So I try to keep, especially outside. Inside is not that big of a deal, but outside, just there's so many other elements that can screw up a lens in your peep. I just try to keep everything as simple as I can.
Well, and there's another big drawback to using a lens if you don't have the right setup as well. And it's for another topic some other time. But I did a podcast with Michael Anderson that was before this one, and we talked a lot about peeps and options and clarifiers and verifiers and what all those were. But that you should somewhat protect the way that the sunlight enters your peep, because depending on the peep you're using and the power of the clarifier or verifier, things that are going on there, shooting into and out of sunlight, which you're going to do probably a lot on a field course, although most of them are probably inside. That's another thing to consider as well. So if you can see a great clear picture and you're happy with a setup like Dan's talking about, then that's a good place to be for sure. But if you are using one, keep those things in mind for sure.
Yeah, so typically on my field setups, it's my sight picture is just a little blurry. I don't freak out about having it crystal clear because you're looking at a round dot, and a round dot is you're aiming at the center of a blurry round dot. It's the exact same place as aiming at the center of a crystal clear dot. So um, little blur doesn't bother me too much. But whenever I shoot 3D, I'll shoot a lower power lens with a clarifier in it, just because you have to aim a little bit more on detail as opposed to a defined spot.
Yep. So let's go back to in your field archery setup, you talked about your arrows, which are very important in field archery for a number of reasons. When we're shooting ASAs, and those that shoot competitive ASAs know that even the configuration of the point of the arrow is very important because you may be trying to slip arrows inside 12 rings at at distances, well, even close distances, anywhere up to in our K50 known pro class that we shoot in. We may have 5, sometimes 6 people on a target. Usually it's 4 or 5, and there may not be room anymore in 12 ring, and so you've got to drive an arrow into there. So one of the big advantages of shooting small shafts, and actually, well, it wasn't my best score this year, I can't say that, but a really good score I had this year, and one of my best scores last year was actually with really thin diameter shafts with rampages, and they're a equivalent to, I want to say, oh my gosh, I just know it's off the top of my head, but they're a slightly smaller than standard size shaft, but bigger than the Pro Tours that he's talking about using. Those Pro Tours are very thin, and so why is it that you choose? What's so important about shooting a thin arrow? Aerodynamically, um, I know for a fact that aerodynamically, thinner arrows shoot better downrange in variable conditions for certain. What's been your experience with the Pro Tours? Why do you choose the Pro Tours? And what is it that is that benefit you're looking for with a small diameter?
Well, I mean, a Pro Tour is, as you know, I mean, it's just the way it's made. The precision from shaft to shaft is so good that one shaft is going to hit the exact same spot as another shaft. You don't have to worry about little inconsistencies or anything like that. But for the small size, shooting outside distances up to 80 yards, I mean, a little bit of wind can make a shaft move a decent amount. So the smaller the shaft, the less profile you're going to have as it's flying through the air for wind to actually push it offline. So that's the big thing for me shooting outside is a smaller shaft, way less wind drift, way less drag, better downrange velocity carry, just everything in general is better with a smaller shaft for shooting longer distances.
In Pro Tours, if I'm wrong here, we can correct this by saying grab some X10s or ACEs. But a Pro Tour also it is not, or maybe it is. Is it a parallel shaft, meaning the entire shaft is the same circumference all the way from point to nock end?
No, a Pro Tour is tapered. So like a regular X10 that you shoot with a recurve is tapered on both ends. A Pro Tour is just tapered from the back end down to the front.
And there is a specific reason why they do that, and it does have to do with wind drag, I believe, mostly. It also throws in a little bit of complication if you're building those arrows. I and I apologize, 'cause I'm not shooting Easton's currently. I haven't shot the Pro Tours, but I know from the X10s for experience, the more I cut off the back end of an arrow, the greater the change in the stiffness of the arrow that's created dynamically from that. I would assume that's pretty accurate with a Pro Tour too. You have to be careful about whether you cut off the front or the back.
Yeah, I typically just cut off the front of those. I'll square the back end of it up, um, just because I'm wanting to cut the weaker side of it off with the like on a regular X10, which is mainly designed for recurve shooters, which is why you have experience with those. Is the back end is weaker. That's why it's tapered at the back end to help with the archer's paradox. So with a compound, you want the stiffer end to be at the back, so that's why they make the back end. They make it tapered just from the back is the biggest and the front is the smallest.
Okay, so the front end's actually tapered, not the back end. I
Yes.
totally had that mixed up. See
Yeah.
how much.
So a regular X10 that you shoot for recurve, they're tapered at both ends.
Yep. Well, and on those, so not that we were going to get in this giant question about arrows, but because now you got me thinking a little bit about it. So with an X10, if I cut an inch off the back of that arrow, that is in effect roughly dynamically, it's going to stiffen that arrow twice as fast as if I cut and that's a rough number, so nobody. And in fact, you know what? You can't prove it to me anyways. But if you cut, you can talk about it, but you can't prove it. If you cut an inch off the back with an X10, it's like cutting 2 inches off of the front in relation to the dynamic stiffness. So with a Pro Tour being tapered in the front, is that exponentially increasing in stiffness or weakness or in relation?
That I couldn't say.
Okay. I would assume it probably almost has to, but it would change rates. So if you were doing some bare shaft testing, which is, again, another giant topic, or tuning, and you start cutting those front ends off, because there's a lot of theories about where the front end of your arrow node should be, which is that point of the arrow that doesn't flex in the dynamic process.
Yep.
There's a lot of theories about where that should be placed in relation to your arrow rest. So there's a whole lot of science that goes into that, and maybe I'll get my old buddy George Tekmachoff on the phone one day, and he can update us as far as, or inform us as far as those variations and statistically, because that guy, he does a lot of the announcing for for a lot like Vegas and things like that. And he and Don Rabska were the two that worked with us intently when we built those X10s back in the day. But dynamically, he'll give us lots of information, so I'm gonna try to get a hold of him for sure. It's a cool arrow shaft.
Yes, it is.
So field archery, not to, well, let's start that again. So the rest of your setup pretty much it's a standard field setup. Your stabilizer setup is what?
As far as length or weights or both, or
Both, yeah. Material. I mean, what brand are you using, and why do you choose it?
I'm using the AAEs. The crap, I can't remember the name of them now.
I can cut that
The
out.
hot rods. The AAE. I'm using AAE hot rods right now. So one of the cool things with those rods is you can actually put weights inside the collar that's on the front, so you don't have a great big stack of weight out in the front of you. So you can keep your overall diameter of your weights down, to catch less wind whenever you're full draw, to help you stay on target a little bit better, which is kind of cool. But I'm trying to think now, I think I'm running 14 ounces in the front, and then in the back I'm running 16 ounces on a 12-inch bar. My front bar is 33 inches.
And what bow are you shooting right now?
The Evolve 35.
That's right. So indoors, you shot an Expression.
No, I shot the Evolve 35 all year this year.
Oh, last year you shot an Expression, was it?
Last year I shot the Expression.
Gotcha.
Yep.
How real quick, in comparing the stabilizer setups between that bow in particular and say the Expression, because I believe, I mean, you can correct me wrong, obviously Evolve 35 and 35 inches axle to axle, the Expression was 40 or is 40, correct?
Yes.
So,
yep.
So would you, regarding field, target, or anything else, how would you change your stabilizer setup from a 35-inch axle bow? And all bows are obviously different, but for you, how did your stabilizer setup change from one to the other?
On the shorter bows, I tend to have to run my back rod down a little bit just to give it a little bit more side to side stability. The longer bows, I didn't have to run it down quite as much to give myself, like when I'm aiming and that shot's not breaking as quick as it normally does. On a longer bow, it seems to hold a little bit better, side to side wise. And on the shorter bows, it wants to kind of waggle back and forth a little bit. So to compensate for that, I ran my weight down a little bit lower than I did on the Expression.
But you kept the weights about the same and the same length stabilizers?
Yep, I think probably on the Expression I ran the front just a little bit heavier. I think that was mainly not necessarily due to the length, but how much holding weight I had with the Expression last year. This year with the Evolve, I was running at 75%. I think the Expression last year I was running it at 65.
Gotcha. And then and one other thing to consider, you mentioned it earlier on your stabilizers for field, is and really actually your goal with all stabilizers, especially if you're shooting outdoors, you're running a smaller diameter inside than what maybe you're running the same one inside and outside, but especially outside, that circumference also, you mentioned something about the wind being more stable with a smaller diameter. That's because of a crosswind, I assume.
Yep.
Awesome.
Yep. So like for me, it's not as big of a deal for field, but like when you're shooting target archery, like a 50-meter shoot, there's always seems to be wind, and even cutting down the effect that wind has on your bow just a little bit can make your hold so much better. It's unreal.
So shooting uphills and downhills, and we touched on this with Jimmy a little bit. Are there any tips? I guess if I can pick one tip that would help people out, it would be how you were shooting uphill and downhill. And Jimmy and I talked a lot about yardage cuts, but I don't think we got into form per se. What changes do you make in your shot execution when you're shooting uphill or downhill at a severe angle versus like if you were shooting just indoors or flat?
So typically for me, whenever I'm shooting uphill, I kind of close my stance a little bit. So you think about if you're shooting, wouldn't say I'm a perfect 90 degrees when I'm shooting flat ground. I'm probably open just a little bit, so my chest is more open to the target. When I'm shooting uphill, since I'm leaning back, and your back doesn't really want to bend. Like if you're thinking about like trying to lean backwards, because if you're open and you try to lean back to shoot uphill, you're basically compressing your spinous processes together on your back, and that isn't comfortable and B isn't stable. So I tend to close my stance just a little bit if I'm aiming significantly uphill, so then I can bend a little bit easier.
Because you actually want to bend at your hips rather than aiming like pointing up. And that's
Yes.
also important, obviously, if you're hunting out of a tree stand, shooting downward at an angle.
Yeah. So and then shooting downhill, it's not as big of a deal. And the big thing on shooting downhill is just to make sure you're keeping basically from the chest up. You want to keep your form the same, and you're rotating your body down instead of just moving your arm down to make sure you stay keeping all the correct muscles engaged, so then you can actually use back tension and make a decent shot instead of doing everything just moving your arm and then manipulating the release to make it go off instead of doing it like you're supposed to.
Gotcha. There's also one other thing with that too. I would, while we're on the topic, that I see a lot of people do is, and tell me your opinion on this because I have my own opinion. But a lot of folks, when they switch to their outdoor bows, knowing they're going to be shooting redding or field archery, they will shorten their draw length some. Maybe not a lot, but a lot of people shorten it up a quarter of an inch, sometimes even a half an inch. What are your thoughts on that, and how does that affect your? Obviously, it's going to affect your tune, but how does that affect, you think, your overall performance in those shoots?
Yeah, typically inside I run everything just a little bit longer. I don't know if it's a quarter inch. I mean, for me, a small change can yield a big difference in how my float pattern looks. Um,
Your float pattern,
so, in,
explain that real quick.
so like whenever I'm aiming on a dot, I kind of want the whatever my aperture I'm using, whether it's a big dot or a ring or whatever, to kind of float in the middle. And if you shorten your draw length, it tends to make the float maybe a little tighter but quicker. And then if you make a mistake, it's typically a bigger mistake than if your draw length's a little longer. A little longer, your float may be slightly bigger, but it seems to me like it's more controlled and slower.
Gotcha.
So yeah, typically, I mean, it may be like 3 twists on my cables to shorten up my draw length from inside to outside.
So 3 twists on
But
your
yeah,
cables to change it up. You're modifying your cables rather than your string, which would mean you're lengthening your cables, correct?
yes, yep,
So you actually untwist those.
yep.
Gotcha. Why do you choose that instead of doing just twisting your string? Because your peep rotation?
Yeah, if you get too many twists, like it takes a lot of twists in your string to manipulate your cams as much as 3 twists out of your cables would be. So you got a couple things to think about there. A, your peep is not going to be in the same position, so you're going to have to put your twist in to get your draw length where you want it, and then either move your peep in the string in the strands or whatever. All right, let's redo that one.
Sure. No, that's all right. Go ahead.
um, it takes a lot of twists in the string to equal the same amount of manipulation in the cams that you can get just by taking 3 twists out of your cables. And then also on peep rotation, if you put too many twists into your string, your peep will actually change position as you draw the bow back. So that's why once I get my peep set where I want it and peep's not moving as I draw it, I try not to touch the string as much as I can.
Gotcha. So when you make a change from indoor, let's assume you're going to use the same bow for most people because they don't have the availability maybe to buy 3 different bows in a year. So when you make that transition, what other you're changing your arrows, obviously. You're going from a large diameter arrow indoors to a very small diameter arrow. What other changes do you make in your setup, or do you start all over from scratch and completely rebuild your bow?
Typically, since I shoot so much indoors, whenever it comes to outdoor season, I'll change my strings. Um, just because it's peace of mind. I don't have to worry about getting to a tournament and be like, oh, my strings stretched because they've got too many shots on them or whatever. Um, for me, it's just peace of mind to be able to start new and get everything exactly where I want it outdoor wise. Really, the only other thing that I change besides the draw length is I'll put a smaller launcher on my blade rest.
For me, a big deal that I strongly emphasize and am a super big advocate of is switching out of the strings that you get from the factory. Now, I'm not saying everybody's factory strings are not made awesomely, because some use some very reputable outsourcing brands. Some make their own. At Matthews, I know we actually built bows with BCY and with Brownell at the time, because it's really unwise to have obviously one company outsourcing your string material from when you're building strings, because if something went bad with that company, you wouldn't have a backup. So we would build strings out of different materials. Now they were all assumingly the same brand and same type of strings. But Dan is do you still build strings or no? Commercials.
No, I kind of got out of that a couple years ago. I've got someone that builds all my stuff now for me. So,
But Dan,
but yeah, I did used to build strings, and I spent a lot of time measuring and trying different formulas, and yeah, so it was a bit of an obsession for a while when I first got all the string materials and the jigs, and just measuring, measuring, and making changes and seeing what happens, and just experimenting with how to make a string work better for me.
and because strings are obviously one of the three most critical parts of your system, like you have an arrow, a bow, and strings, like super important. When you were building strings, what were some for those who are there are a lot of people, and I mean a ridiculous amount of people now out there building strings. What are the things that you
Mm-hmm.
would look for in our first of all, I guess, uh, of course, PSE is has their own strings that come from the factory, so I'm sure you have accolades for those. But what are some things if you're going to go to custom route, or maybe you don't need to with the PSE in general, and your thoughts and feelings, but what are some things that how do you find your way through this giant string mecca? A lot of string makers that I've talked to that are new are like, hey, I make new strings and I make you a set. Most of them don't even know that there's different brands of strings. They don't understand the difference between 452X and Fury, and it's shocking to me. So if you're going to put on a custom set of strings, is there any recommendations that you have, having done so much with strings? And Dan, honestly, hands down, did some of the best work I've ever seen with custom strings. What Real quick to touch on that slightly, what kind of how do you find the right string builder, and do you ask them for a specific brand, and what brands work best with your bows? Are all PSE created with the same string material, or are you using different materials for different bows?
Well, just touching your first question, if you're gonna try to find someone who is gonna build you a set of strings, don't just find the cheapest guy out there and have him build your strings, because I can almost guarantee you he or she doesn't put the amount of time into it that's necessary to create a string. Because basically, you figure someone who's really taking their time and building a really good string is going to have a lot of time on the stretcher and serving them. And someone who's charging you $45 for a set of string, I guarantee you is not taking the time to do it. So, and then don't be afraid to ask them a bunch of questions. If they want to earn your business, they better have really good answers for the questions you're going to ask them. So, and the questions you want to ask them is, what type of material do you use? What type of material do you prefer to use? Here's what I'm going to do. Here's the kind of shooting I'm going to do. Where do you stretch your strings at? How long do you stretch them? What kind of serving material do you use? If they're a person who really knows what they're doing, they'll have really good answers for all those questions.
And the process of how they lay up strings is is critical too, and obviously the tools that they're using. We, like I said, just did a podcast with Michael Anderson, and briefly we touched on that string machine that he has, string making machine, which is incredible. But is there any set for those who are starting to make their own strings and they're exploring that on themselves? Obviously, they're not going to have crazy dollars invested in. There's probably going to have a simple jig. Is there any little hint that you can give them while they're laying up their strings that would help them greatly?
The biggest thing on your jigs is to make sure when you're laying up your posts, whether you're using a 2 post, 3 post, 4 post, to make sure those are sturdy. Because if you start laying out your strings and you're on a real flimsy jig, just like say taking a piece of string and wrapping it around your finger, the more wraps you get around it, the more pressure you're going to have on it. So that very first strand that you've laid out after you've gone around 12 times is not going to have the same tension on it as the last strand you laid out if your jig is flimsy.
Which is going to relate in the number of shots probably you're going to have to fire through that bow and what we call, which I still don't know that I believe is exactly accurate, string stretch, correct?
Yep.
It,
So you're going to have the stretch and creep. If you lay everything out with the exact same tension, then when you stretch your string, all the strands are getting stretched exactly the same. Or if you have your very first strand you laid out doesn't have as much tension on it as the last strand you laid out, you're going to stretch those last strands more. And then as you shoot your bow, those are going to end up fatiguing first. And then you're going to get into those first strands you laid out, and those are going to fatigue last. So then you're going to have to go through. I mean, it's just going to take forever to get a string to actually settle in and be done moving once you get it on your bow if it's not laid up correctly.
and you also had a process to help alleviate any inconsistencies in there. It was pretty. I would say I know it was pretty. Well, I don't know the words, aggressive or extreme compared to what a lot of people do with their strings. How did you actually? Because you had a little system you used of stretching those strings, and you had an incredible amount of tension that you used to actually stretch those strings, which I assume is before you
Yeah.
put the serving on.
Yep. So typically I'd serve the end loops. I'm not a real big fan of tag ends. It's just to me that's the end of the string that kind of holds all the strands together whenever you start twisting before you actually serve the entire string. So that has to be real stable, and tag ends are just they're real fragile. If you're gonna be messing with your strings a lot, tuning or doing anything, it's just a real fragile thing that can start fraying real easy if you're not careful. So I always used braided 7,000 serving on my end loops just because it keeps the bundles together tight before you start twisting and stretching, and C, it just gives you a little bit of ability to not have to be as careful when you're moving stuff around when you're tuning your bow.
And for
Um,
a guy that's making his own strings, how without having obviously like a killer special archery string set up where he's got tension being pulled on it, what's another method a guy could use to stretch his strings in the beginning on a budget?
so the stretcher I built from scratch, just on stuff I bought at the hardware store, um, and then I bought a die spring from McMaster Carr, and then bought a crane scale so I could calibrate how much um, pressure in the spring equaled how much weight. So I think in one of my stretchers I probably had $30. So you don't have to spend a ton of money to get something real nice like the specialty stretcher. The specialty stretcher is awesome, um, and it's a way easier to use than the system I had. But there's no way I could get the amount of weight that I wanted to use off of a commercially built stretcher.
So how much weight and how long did you stretch them for?
So typically, like on my spring, I would crank it up to 700 pounds and then let it sit for 24 hours. And by the time I took it off, since the specialty machine uses an air compressor, so it keeps it at 400 pounds the entire time. So as the string stretches, the air the air pressure keeps it the same, which is kind of nice with the specialty system. Is that the string stays the same pressure the entire time. Mine would start out at 700 pounds, and after it stretched the string, when I'd take it off, it'd be around, depending on the length of string and how many strands I had in it, it would be between 550 and 600 pounds.
Gotcha. And for guys that are shooting PSEs out there, are the materials different from model to model? Are you using one company or are you using two companies, or what do you see? Is there a manual somewhere that shows, hey, you should be using Fury or whatever that material you want?
If you go onto PSE's website and click on one of the drop down boxes, it has a deal on there that says support, and then you can go in there and find tune charts, and it'll tell you what material we build from the factory, how long each string is. Um, yeah, so material and string length are all on PSE's website.
I would strongly, strongly, strongly suggest, because I would get people that I was helping on a regular basis call me and they built new strings, and even if they weren't stretching, they're upset because they're not impacting the same place. Something's gone wrong in their tune. They get a funky tear. 99.9% of the time, almost always it was because they were using a different material than what the manufacturer actually built that string for. And it's very important, even with the weights that are on the string. And I don't know if I'll be able to have time to pop a video up, but they are coming for sure. The impacts of adding or taking weight off of your string, when you look at it at 4,000 frames per second, you will understand exactly why it's extremely important that you're using what the factory setup was, because that's how that entire bow is engineered. And usually when people are struggling with bows, and especially after they put on new strings, it's usually because they got on an online resource somewhere, Archery Talk, YouTube, something, and somebody told them that Browning Fury is the best or BCY 452 is the best, and they built those strings out of it, but that was not the intended string material that the bow was using, and that changes the way that bow performs.
Yep.
So, anyhow, big lesson there for all you guys playing with strings. So, are you going to any ASAs this year? Any big K50 events?
I honestly don't know if I'm going to have time. With the new job, I really don't know what my schedule is going to be like this summer. If I do, it'll probably be a last minute decision of, hey, I can make it to this one this weekend, and I'll go.
Well, I hope to see you there for some for sure. Louis Holmes is tearing some stuff up with that Evolve 35.
Yes, he is. He's shot really, really well this year. He made the shoot off at Vegas, made the shoot off at Nationals, won the last known pro shoot down in Texas. He's rocking that Evolve this year for sure.
Well, and that's a bow actually I got. The guys at Select, Daryl Steenen, he always gets mad at me because I say his name wrong, Steinen or Steenen, and it's sorry, Daryl. He's a really great guy, and he's been allowing me to, as I'm building a lot of these modules and as I'm building these learning systems that are going to be launched. I'll be a little behind the podcast launch for sure, but he's allowing me to play with a lot of different bows. And one of the bows I grabbed off the shelf the other day was the Evolve 35, and I took that to the ASA this past weekend. And I think last year I shot a 28 up at one round, but it was a considerably easier course. But this shoot, aside from setting my sight like a knucklehead, this day two actually I shot a really good score with that Evolve. I was really impressed with how easily things came together. Had a couple little struggles right at the beginning, but I called Dan, and Dan's one of the first guys I call. Craig Stanky's my sales rep in my area, and I get some information from him sometimes too. But came down to realizing it was a really silly little error I was making in my setup, and we all do it. But Dan is a great resource for those of you that are picking up PSEs or maybe wanting to know which ones to get. And obviously, your dealers are as well too. But Dan is a tournament archer. I don't know how many other sales reps you guys have at PSE that are tournament archer shooters that are at, how do I say that? at the level of competition of which you are at or consistently have been at. I don't know who else is out there sales repping across the country. Is there anyone else you would point to?
Scott Darnell shoots ASA semi-pro, so he's a really good shooter too for us. Craig has been a IBO world champion in the past, so he's a really, really good shooter. He's kind of transitioned more into hunting as his drug now as opposed to tournament archery. So
good boy.
But he's still capable of throwing down some good scores too.
Awesome. Well, so those resources, obviously you can find those on the PSE website. Of course, your dealers are your first line of questioning you go through, but as you're exploring new bows, most dealers, they have a business to run. They're setting up bows quickly. They're getting them out the door because their profit margin. What's odd about the archery industry is if you go to O'Reilly's and buy a set of brakes, the guy doesn't come out and put the brakes on for you for free. In the archery world, like dealers set up their bows, most of the time people do it for free, which a lot of folks don't understand why there's not an incredible amount of time taken with that. But hopefully some of those resources out there, there's John Dudley's out there with Knock On, obviously does a lot with Hoyt, and there's my resource that's going to be up soon. But sales reps are great. When you're at shows, a lot of times, Dan's job is on the road a lot. So he's in a lot of pro shops. Maybe you'll get lucky and could, contact him. Maybe find out where he's going to be, when he's going to be. If you have some specific questions about a bow you're looking at or a bow you've purchased and how to, the little niches, because every bow really does have its own little, I don't want to call them quirks because I don't mean it in a negative way, but there's little things that will help you quite a bit with every bow model out there, regardless of the brand.
Yep.
So if someone was going to, well, I'm going to word that differently. So if you're looking for a resource above and beyond what your local dealer is it okay, or is it fine to call the factory, or how would they get in touch with someone at a higher level like you?
Typically, we like to have everyone go through the dealer, just because if we dealt with every single person that is a customer for every single pro shop, well, I would never get anything done.
Right.
So obviously, if the we'd like to have the dealer be the link between the customer and the factory, or the customer and the sales rep. Um, but typically, if someone needs to get a hold of me, it's typically through a dealer. A dealer says, "Hey, I got this guy that's we're having some issues. Can you help?" And then from there, I'll say, "Yep, let me call a factory and get an answer for you." Or if I don't, typically I know most all of myself, but I have resources that I can go to. I can call one of the engineers and say, "Hey, we got this going on with this bow. What do you think?" So
Well, and I certainly don't mean that in a way that there's any kind of problems with certain ones, but like I say, there's certainly some things that will help you individually with bows, because a lot of people start to get into this in-depth archery tuning that they find on Archery Talk and some other places, which Archery Talk can be a great resource, but there's also a lot of people who don't have credentials or experience that are directing people to do things that they really should not be doing with their bows and
yeah,
their tuning processes. So
and I mean the best thing is if you don't feel comfortable messing with stuff, make sure you find someone who really knows what they're doing. And if you have a pro shop that is really good at it, make sure you take care of them and make sure you send people to them. Because if the guys that really know what they're doing can't make a living doing it, they're not going to do it. And then what happens when the dealer that really knows what he's doing is gone?
right, I can leave that out, by the way, if you want me to. I, maybe.
It doesn't
Okay.
matter.
All right. Let's see. I had one other thing. Oh. The rest of your bow humps, excuse me. The rest of your season, obviously, you're going to be busy with your job. But if you get a chance to shoot the ASAs, like we mentioned, are you going to shoot the same bow you're using for field right now? Do you think you'll swap out to bigger arrows, or are you going to?
I do have one bow set up with Super Drive 23s right now, just in case I do go shoot a 3D. So I'll be shooting that. It's the same bow, same setup, same draw weight. It's just different arrows.
Are you going to Yankton?
No.
Okay. Yankton's a unique case in that it used to be the old Atlantic City round, which was one of my favorites because, man, made a lot of money there. But it's a 60, 50, and 40 yard shoot at traditional looking Olympic style target faces with yellow, red, like you
Yep.
shoot indoors. But they're
Yep.
bigger. And
It's a 92 centimeter Yankton.
yep. Oh, okay. Sorry, I didn't even know that. Just knew it was about that size, so it's smaller than what we used to shoot. But that tournament there, obviously, wind's not a factor. You could use your ASA setup if you're going out for the first time, although you don't want to get too big on your shafts.
Say the 40 yarder could get some destruction going in there if you're shooting too big of shafts.
Yeah.
I know Roger Willett that was shooting Super Drive 25s 2 years ago. No, last year. Yeah, it was last year. And he had, I mean, even at 50 yards, he had a couple kick out just because the shafts were so big and he shoots so well that he ended up losing a few points just because his shafts were so big.
So make sure you keep that in mind, because Yankton is only it's not next weekend after, I believe. So I'll be there for sure, and I will not be shooting PS26s. They'll be considerably smaller shafts. So just a little hint on that shoot. But any of the USA target archery stuff, I don't even know the formats anymore. That used to be the National Archery Association Olympic style tournaments, stuff that real wild so well from winning stuff with their compounds. They shoot a lot of small arrows, and again, all of those tournaments, with the exception of Yankton, I believe, are shot outdoors. So again, you want to look at a small shaft. Like your field setup would probably work for most people who are trying to go out and play that round, correct?
Yep.
Awesome.
Yeah, so most everything's shot at 50 meters now for compounds at the 80 centimeter face.
So for the most part, you're saying right now you're going to use the Evolve 35 for, I mean, at least for this year of the lineup that we know of. You're going to Evolve 35 indoor for 20 yards, Evolve 35 for ASAs, and Evolve 35 for field, everything.
Yep.
Awesome. I just put in an order with Craig for a Supra, so I've got to play with that one too, especially after experiencing the way that configuration of that bow that Evolve 35 aimed for me. It was absolutely incredible.
Yeah, I was shot the little shorter axle bows really good this last year, and with the size of the cam, it's actually the exact same length overall end of cam up to end of cam as the Super is. So even though it is a 35-inch bow, it still gives you a really good string angle at full draw.
But the Supra has a different cam system on it, correct? It is not the Evolve cam system.
No, it's not. The Super has the medium drive cam on it, is what comes on it from the factory.
So when you get on a lot of forums and a lot of digging for target archery, you're going to see a lot of people praising the Evolve 35 cam system. And just give me a quick rundown of what makes it different. Why is it so special? Why is it the way that you're headed to as a company?
The Evolve cam system is a binary style cam system, which allows us to do a lot of cool things with the amount of let off that you have. So in the last few years, people have wanted more and more let off. So they designed this cam to be able to give people what they wanted as far as let off goes, up in the 90% range. But the cool thing with our system is you can adjust your let off on the module that comes in the bow from 80, 85, and 90%. And then we also have a low let off module where you can adjust it from 65, 70, and 75%.
Well,
so it just gives you the ability to make the bow feel exactly the way you want it to feel.
And for me, being a recurve shooter from beginning as far as competition goes, obviously I'm a very dynamic shooter, meaning I move a lot with my back purposefully to get through the shot. So that 65% was extremely attractive to me. I've struggled a lot coming back to archery with these high let off bows, and I run mine at 65%, but in reality, when you do the math, mine is it's actually 61%. And I want to say I'm holding 22 pounds. So for me, that's really awesome. For a lot of other shooters like Chance Bobeff, I don't think he could survive with a 65% let off because he holds for I don't know, a very long time. Yeah, I'd run out of breath for sure. He's got to breathe or he'd pass out. But he aims for a very, very long time, and there's pros and cons to that for another episode somewhere, obviously. But that to me is what make that, for me personally, that's why I'm digging that cam system, and I'm hoping my Super is going to be pretty similar to that, at least as far as where I can get the let off.
Super, you have the ability of changing. There's the 75% let off module comes standard on the bow, and then in a little baggie on the string, there'll be a module that has a 65% option on it as well.
Awesome. And the Evolve 35, that's something you got to pick up from your dealer separate, correct, or no?
Yes, yeah. So the low let off module is a separate order.
Gotcha. And hunting wise, because I'm sure you've got some big antlers you're going to be chasing compared to what you've been in Missouri.
I got to find some places to hunt first.
Maybe I'll come over and help you find those.
Yeah, I've probably seen more pictures of dead 200-inch deer in the last 3 months than I've probably seen ever in my entire life. And it seems like it's all kind of centered around just north of Columbus, which is kind of nice.
Well, my requirements on a hunting bow for now, because I'm not running multiple bows for hunting. That was back in the day when I was sponsored by bow companies and I had 33 on the wall. For me, hands down, without a doubt, I will not hunt with anything other than a carbon bow. And the biggest reason is because I'm hunting some pretty extreme conditions at times. I'm hunting at 8, 9, 10,000 feet and above, chasing elk, and it's a big deal for me to be able to use something like a carbon air where I'm literally able to pack a pound more water than I am a pound bow. I mean, Matthews Halons shoot great. I got a Halon X I shot last year, shot great, but my gosh, man, it's a whole pound heavier, I believe, or more than your carbon air. And obviously, some of your tournament bows are heavier too. I'm going to pack water before I pack any extra weight on my bow or food, because it's more important to me.
Yep.
But for you, from a whitetail perspective, which is probably the majority of my listeners right now, and obviously, again, I'm not changing my bows whenever I go into the timber. I mean, I'm always playing with all kinds of bows. But for you, when you move into the hunting season, what are you going to use for your whitetail bow?
I shot the Carbon 34 last year, just because I had a carbon bow and I really wanted to shoot it. And the nice thing with the carbon is when it gets real cold, like late season when I killed that buck this year, and it was 6 degrees outside. The carbon doesn't feel cold when it's 6 degrees outside, which is kind of nice.
And you can laugh at that all you want until you're waiting for 16 does and 4 younger bucks to walk by you for 25 minutes while that little one's hung up 30 yards from your stand and you can't get a shot. It's a big expense, but your two big benefits that I see are, number one, the lightweight if you're a Western hunter at all or you're going on Western hunts, and as a whitetail hunter, that's something I'm just not willing to give up anymore. the even if you wrap an aluminum bow and you're holding that bow for any length of time when you're hunting in conditions like I definitely always wind up doing late season, it's windy, negative, whatever it is outside potentially a lot of times. Man, that's not something I'm willing to give up. Those are two big things that I've got going. But from last year's Carbon, you've made some significant changes into this year's Carbon bow, correct?
Uh, Really, the only significant change was the cam. The riser is actually the same between the two bows we have now. We have a Carbon Air 32 and a Carbon Air 34. So the Carbon Air 32 is exactly the same as last year. Same limbs, same limb pockets. It just has a different cam on it. So we put the Evolve cam system on it. So everything we talked about with the Evolve 35, you have those options on the Carbon Air. Now the Carbon Air 34 is the brand new one this year. It's got a different limb pocket on it with the wide track limbs and the Evolve cam system.
Gotcha. So, and these bows are obviously, these are top end bows. These are very expensive bows. Doesn't matter what company you pick a Carbon bow up from, they're extremely expensive. The guys who were shooting the bows from last year, would you say, I mean, obviously you want to sell more bows, duh, but is it worth it for a jump for, I mean, guys who haven't made the switch into a Carbon, I would really suggest, especially if you're whitetailing, a 34-inch axle to axle bow. It's the axle to axle is not as big of a deal to me at all. That's what it is out west, because out west I want ultra light, ultra compact in design. Obviously for whitetails, it doesn't really matter. It's not a relevant factor for most people unless you do a lot of ground hunting. Is there the difference between the 32 and 34? If a guy was going to buy a new one or upgrade, are you content with the ones they have? Or
so spec wise, just besides 32 and 34-inch axle to axle, the 32 is actually a 6 and an 1/8 inch brace height, and is it's about 5 to 7 feet per second faster than the 34 is, because the 34 is 6 and 7/8 inch brace height. So you get almost a 7-inch brace height with a 34, and you're just over 6 on the 32. So if someone wants that little extra speed, I'd steer them towards the 32. If they want the longer, more stable platform, then obviously the 34 is the way to go.
and I would say for most whitetail guys, I would head towards that 34 if it were me personally. But
Yeah, and the 34 is not slow by any means. It still shoots 336 with a 7-inch brace height. So you're still going to be getting way more kinetic energy you need for a whitetail.
well, good luck to you this year, Dan, as you have fun in your new job. And
Yeah,
man, it's been good talking to you and good catching up with you. I'm sure I'll see you somewhere on the tournament circuit.
I'll see you at Reading for sure.
You're not. I'm bumming.
You're not going to
I
Reading?
got my kiddos, and I haven't seen them for weeks, and I've swapped out other weekend. Well, swapped out. I've unfortunately had to skip some weekends with my kids in an effort to make some side cash shooting, but I just can't. It's the most expensive shoot of the year for me, but it's also the shoot I love the most, and that was my sacrificial shoot I made this year. I shouldn't have done it, but I decided to. So, bummer.
Well, darn.
Yeah, but I'll see you somewhere else, I'm sure. I mean, I'll be at all the ASAs, obviously, if you make it to one of those, and if not, maybe we'll hook up along the road somewhere and talk some deer hunting a little bit, and maybe even get together and do some hunting.
Sounds good to me.
Awesome. Thanks, brother, for all your input. And again, if you want to get a hold of anyone at the PSE, well, I'm just going to skip that part. Let me do that again. Well, thanks again, brother, for your time, and we're going to go back to enjoying Easter since it's Easter weekend.
Yes, definitely.
All right, thanks, Dan.
And say everyone get out and go to your dealer and go shoot the new PSEs if you haven't done it yet, because it's not the same old PSE as it used to be.
Awesome. That should be your guys' new tagline. I'm joking. It's always been awesome. Thanks a bunch, man. Appreciate it.
Yep. Have a good one.
Bye. Thanks so much for tuning into the Rod White Bow Show. To help me keep more content like this coming, I would be super appreciative if you could subscribe, like, and share this episode on your own favorite social media platforms. And as always, feel free to make comments in the section below. By commenting, you're not only giving me more direction about the information that you want me to deliver to you in the future, but you're also helping me reach more people just like us. And as a thank you for your support, the first 50 people that sign up after the show for my new online course, 60-Day Elk Training, will receive a free extinguisher game call valued at $29.99 with an instructional DVD where I walk you through how to communicate with mature whitetails and bring them tight into bow range. Thanks again for tuning in.